My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant. My career has trained me to notice tiny inconsistencies before they become disasters. Ironically, I completely missed the biggest one in my own life. 6 months before our wedding, my fiancé, Ethan, spent 43 straight evenings restoring my late grandmother's antique oak hope chest. Every scratch disappeared beneath his patient hands, and inside it he carefully placed the white satin gloves my grandmother had worn on her own wedding day in 1968. At exactly 6:42 p.m. during our wedding reception, his mother stood, lifted her champagne glass, called me a gold digger marrying up, and everything Ethan had built seemed to crack in a single sentence. 20 minutes later, I was holding her hand in front of 212 silent guests. Here's what she didn't know about that night, or about the 4 years that led to it. People often imagine wealthy families announcing their rules out loud. Mine never did. Ethan's family ranked people through smaller things: who sat closest to his mother at dinner, whose birthdays deserved catered parties, whose opinions were interrupted, and who was expected to apologize first after every disagreement. Nobody explained the system because everyone already understood it. The white satin gloves became my quiet reminder of another way to live. My grandmother used to tell me, gloves don't make a bride elegant. Her hands do. She believed kindness was something you practiced, not something you inherited. After she passed away in 2020, those gloves were all I had left of her wedding day, tucked inside tissue paper that still smelled faintly of lavender. Ethan treated them like they belonged in a museum. He refused to touch them without washing his hands first. That was Ethan. He wasn't flashy despite growing up surrounded by money. He drove the same dark blue 2018 Honda Accord he'd owned since graduate school, volunteered every second Saturday at the neighborhood food pantry, and somehow remembered the birthdays of people he'd met only once. When he restored my grandmother's hope chest, he measured every hinge twice because he knew sentiment mattered more than perfection. His mother, Victoria Harper, measured people differently. To Victoria, family wasn't about affection. It was about presentation. She loved introducing Ethan as my son, the corporate attorney, before mentioning anything about who he actually was. At dinners, she casually asked people where they'd vacationed, what neighborhoods they lived in, or which private schools their children attended. Every question sounded polite until you noticed they were really calculations. I noticed. I simply convinced myself they weren't important. Looking back now, that's the hardest truth to admit. When Victoria complimented my dress by saying, "It almost looks designer," I laughed. When she asked whether I'd signed a prenuptial agreement for everyone's protection, I smiled politely. When she introduced me at charity events as Claire, she's marrying Ethan, instead of mentioning my own career, I told myself she was just traditional. I wasn't only being mistreated. I was helping normalize it. By staying quiet, I made it easier for everyone else to stay comfortable too. Wedding planning began 11 months before our ceremony. Because I spend my days documenting financial evidence, every decision went into writing. Our shared planning folder contained 96 emails, 38 vendor contracts, and a color-coded spreadsheet with every payment listed down to the last $47.18 centerpiece deposit. Ethan joked that if our florist disappeared, I could probably reconstruct the wedding from memory. Every major decision included Victoria. She chose the string quartet. She approved the floral arrangements. She even requested that the family photographs begin precisely at 4:15 p.m., and I adjusted the timeline without complaint. After each meeting, I sent a follow-up email summarizing everything we'd agreed on. Ethan copied everyone so there would never be confusion later. Victoria always replied with one sentence. Asterisk, looks acceptable. Asterisk. Then, almost as an afterthought, she'd add the phrase she used whenever someone forgot where she believed they belonged. Just remember your place. Everyone around the table would chuckle awkwardly. So dramatic, Ethan's Aunt Linda would whisper with a smile. I laughed too. I wish I hadn't. 3 weeks before the wedding, everything still looked perfectly organized. On Tuesday, September 10th at 8:17 p.m., I finished addressing the last 12 invitation envelopes while Ethan assembled welcome bags for out-of-town guests. The restored hope chest sat beside our dining room table, its polished oak reflecting the warm kitchen lights. Inside, my grandmother's white satin gloves rested beneath a layer of tissue paper, waiting for Saturday. My phone vibrated. The message came from Victoria. Asterisk, we need to discuss expectations before the wedding. Asterisk. Nothing unusual there. She loved meetings almost as much as she loved controlling them. I called her at 8:22 p.m. She answered on the second ring. I've been thinking, she began. Several relatives have expressed concerns. About what? Appearances. I frowned. I'm not following. She sighed dramatically. Claire, people notice these things. Ethan comes from a respected family. You don't. The room suddenly felt smaller. Ethan was humming quietly while arranging handwritten welcome notes into gift bags only a few feet away. He had no idea his mother was carefully dismantling the piece we'd spent months building. I don't understand, I said carefully. I think you do. Then she delivered the sentence I'd somehow spent 4 years trying to avoid hearing. People already think you're a gold digger marrying up. Silence. She continued before I could respond. I've defended you as much as I can. My fingers tightened around the phone. I've never asked Ethan for $1. That isn't the point. It seems like exactly the point. Her voice became colder. Know your place, Claire. There it was again. The same phrase. The same quiet reminder that, in her mind, I was permanently below her family. I looked across the room. The handmade welcome bags. The seating chart spread across the table. The wedding favors tied with navy ribbon. The restored hope chest. Every visible sign of love surrounded me while someone tried to reduce that love to a financial transaction. The contrast almost made me laugh. Instead, I simply thanked her for her honesty and ended the call at 8:31 p.m. Ethan looked up immediately. What happened? For a few seconds I couldn't answer. Then I handed him my phone. Victoria had followed the call with a text. 8:32 p.m. Asterisk, I hope you'll remember your place during the reception. Our family has a reputation to protect. Asterisk. Ethan read it twice. He didn't swear. He didn't throw the phone. He simply sat down beside the hope chest and stared at the polished wood his own hands had restored. I thought. He whispered. Then he stopped. That unfinished sentence hurt more than any angry speech could have. After almost a full minute, he carefully lifted the lid of the chest. He unfolded the tissue paper. He looked at my grandmother's gloves. They deserved a happier day than this. Not we deserved. They. As though even an object carrying love from another generation had been insulted. Watching him accept the disappointment so quietly broke something inside me. In that silence, memories I had dismissed for years rearranged themselves. Victoria insisting I shouldn't sign holiday cards with Ethan because wives earn that privilege. Victoria introducing every girlfriend before me by profession, yet introducing me only as Ethan's fiancé. Victoria questioning whether my parents could comfortably attend events held at expensive country clubs. Each incident had seemed small enough to excuse. Together they formed a pattern so obvious I wondered how I'd ever missed it. I had spent years believing patience would eventually become acceptance. Instead, my silence had simply taught everyone, including me, that disrespect had no consequences. The next morning, I did what I thought any reasonable person would do. I asked for help. At 9:05 a.m., I met Ethan's older sister, Melissa, at a small cafe 2 blocks from her office. She arrived carrying an iced latte and a laptop bag, already apologizing for being 5 minutes late. When I showed her Victoria's text message, she read it slowly, then rubbed her forehead. I'm sorry, she said. Those 2 words gave me hope. Then she ruined it. You know how mom gets before family events. I waited. She's stressed. I folded my hands together. Melissa, she called me a gold digger. I know. And? She sighed. I'm not saying she's right. I'm saying, don't make this bigger than it already is. There it was. The family rule. Keep the peace. even if the price was someone else's dignity. An hour later, at 10:40 a.m., I called Ethan's Aunt Denise, the person everyone described as the reasonable one. She listened without interrupting. For a moment, I thought this conversation would be different. Instead, she laughed softly. "Honey, every family has someone difficult. This isn't difficult. It's one weekend." "No," I answered quietly. "It's 4 years." She hesitated. "I just don't want you starting your marriage with unnecessary drama." I thanked her for her time and ended the call. My phone suddenly felt much heavier than it had that morning. 2 people, 2 chances, 2 reminders that preserving comfort mattered more than protecting truth. I walked outside because I couldn't breathe inside our apartment anymore. September air carried the first hint of autumn. Leaves scraped gently across the sidewalk while commuters hurried past without noticing me. For 10 minutes, I simply stood there. Then Ethan found me. He didn't ask whether I'd cried. He already knew. "I talked to Dad," he said. I searched his face. "And?" A tired smile crossed his lips. He asked if apologizing to Mom would make everything easier. Of course he had. Even Richard Harper, a kind man in so many ways, had spent 38 years believing that peace meant agreeing with Victoria. We sat together on a nearby bench without speaking. Finally, Ethan looked at me. "Can I tell you something honestly?" I nodded. "I've been asking you to survive things I should have stopped." Those words landed harder than any apology I'd ever received. Because they were true. He wasn't taking responsibility for his mother's behavior. He was taking responsibility for asking me to keep absorbing it. I squeezed his hand. I wasn't innocent either. He frowned. "I kept laughing when she insulted me," I admitted. "I kept telling everyone she didn't really mean it. Every time I stayed quiet, I made it easier for the next comment to happen." Neither of us argued. There wasn't anything left to argue with. That afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was my older brother, Daniel. I'd texted him only one sentence earlier that morning. "Can you call when you're free?" He listened to everything. The text. The phone call. The phrase, "know your place." The accusation that I was marrying for money. When I finally stopped talking, there was complete silence. For nearly 15 seconds. Then he asked one question. "Claire, if this were happening to me instead of you, what would you tell me to do?" I didn't answer. Because I already knew. He spoke before I could. "You tell me that being invited into a family should never require surrendering my self-respect." I closed my eyes. "You don't need permission to protect your peace," Daniel continued. "But if you've been waiting for someone to give it to you." He paused. "I'm giving it now." Something inside me settled. Not because the problem was solved. Not because Victoria had changed. But because, for the first time since that phone call at 8:22 p.m., someone had reacted as though the insult was exactly as serious as it felt. That single conversation didn't erase the hurt. It simply reminded me that dignity doesn't become unreasonable just because other people find it inconvenient. For the first time, I stopped asking how to make Victoria accept me. I started wondering what a marriage built without her approval might actually look like. I spent nearly an hour staring at my phone before I replied to Victoria. The first draft was only 9 words. "You'll never control me or this marriage again." I deleted it. The second draft was longer and much sharper. It listed every insult I could remember, every holiday she had ruined, every time she had questioned my motives. It felt satisfying for exactly 12 seconds. Then I deleted that one too. Anger would only give her a different story to tell. At 7:18 p.m. that evening, I finally sent the only message that mattered. Victoria, the wedding will continue exactly as planned. Your seat will remain reserved because you are Ethan's mother, and I genuinely hope you'll choose to celebrate with us. I won't argue about my character or my reasons for marrying your son again. That conversation is over. 3 minutes later, her reply appeared. We'll see if you remember your place. Nothing more. Wedding day arrived beneath clear October skies. At 6:42 p.m., just after dinner had been served, Victoria stood with a champagne glass in her hand. The ballroom grew quiet. "I'd like to offer a toast," she announced. She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. I only hope my son realizes that sometimes people marry for opportunity rather than love. Claire is a gold digger marrying up. 212 guests froze. You could hear silverware touching china. Ethan started to rise. I gently touched his arm. Then I stood. Without rushing. Without raising my voice. I walked directly toward Victoria until only a step separated us. Then I reached out and gently took her hand. It surprised everyone, especially her. Looking into her eyes, I spoke quietly enough that the room leaned in to hear. Victoria, this hand helped raise the man I love. She blinked. I'm grateful for that. I tightened my fingers just enough for reassurance, not confrontation. But if you truly believed I married Ethan for money, you wouldn't be insulting me today. Confusion crossed her face. You'd be wondering why your son believes so little about himself that money would be the only reason someone could love him. Silence. Real silence. Not awkwardness. Reflection. I married the man who restored my grandmother's hope chest for 43 evenings because he knew what it meant to me. I married the man who remembers birthdays, volunteers on Saturdays, and has never once measured another person's worth by their bank account. I looked down briefly at our joined hands. That isn't marrying up. I met her eyes again. That's simply marrying well. Nobody applauded. Nobody cheered. The room remained respectfully still. Victoria slowly lowered her champagne glass. For the first time in 4 years, she had no catchphrase. No, know your place. No clever remark. Only silence. The reception continued. People laughed again. The band began playing. Life moved forward. Winning, however, didn't feel triumphant. It felt expensive. I had accepted that some relationships never become what we hope they will. Later that evening, Richard quietly sat beside me. I should have stopped this years ago, he admitted. He told me, briefly, about Victoria's childhood, a home where affection depended on achievement and appearances mattered more than comfort. It explained many things. It excused none. Pain can explain behavior. It should never become permission for it. 3 weeks later, Victoria arrived at our home without calling. We didn't rush to answer the door. She waited nearly 7 minutes on the porch. When we invited her inside, she tried familiar tactics. She insisted everyone had misunderstood. She blamed wedding stress. Neither worked. Finally, her shoulders relaxed. She asked one quiet question. Is it too late to fix this? My condition isn't about me, I answered. You owe Ethan an apology first. She nodded. The conversation between mother and son happened privately. I never asked what was said. I only knew that when Ethan came back downstairs, his eyes were red and Victoria looked 20 pounds lighter than when she'd arrived. Some moments belong to the people who live them. A year later, Sunday dinners looked very different. There was no assigned seating. No invisible hierarchy. Everyone served themselves. Victoria never reclaimed the head of the table. Instead, one evening she quietly walked over to me carrying a small white box. Inside were my grandmother's white satin gloves. I thought these belonged with you, she said softly. No speech. No performance. Just a simple gesture. She took her place beside everyone else, not above them. Months later, when Ethan and I welcomed our first daughter, Victoria held her granddaughter with extraordinary care. Before anyone else could speak, she looked at me and smiled. She'll always know her place. She paused. In the middle of people who love her. I smiled back. Not because the past had disappeared, but because the future no longer had to repeat it. Those white satin gloves still rest inside the restored hope chest. Every anniversary, I unfold them for a moment before putting them away again. They remind me that on October 12, at exactly 6:42 p.m., in front of 212 witnesses, I learned something no inheritance could ever buy. The strongest hand you'll ever hold isn't the one with the most power, it's the one that refuses to let dignity go.